The wind of Red Creek carried more than dust, it carried whispers. It snaked through the narrow streets, curling around saloon doors, brushing past the church steeple and finding its way into every ear. They all whispered the same name, Clara Dawson. Once that name had been spoken with admiration. The preacher's daughter. The girl who taught the children their letters. The one who sang hymns so softly that men would remove their hats and women would close their eyes just to listen. But now, her name was spat like a curse. It had been a night no one in Red Creek forgot, though they pretended not to remember the details. The moon was swollen, white as bone, when they found her near the riverbank. Her hair was tangled, her dress torn, her hands muddy from clawing the earth. The Bible her father had given her at age 10 floated beside her in the current, its pages swollen and dark. Clara didn't speak that night. She couldn't. When she awoke the next morning in her father's house, the sheriff stood by the door, hat in hand, avoiding her eyes. Her father, Reverend Dawson, looked older, his hair grayer, his shoulders slumped. "You'll tell me what happened," he demanded. But Clara's throat was dry. All she could remember was laughter, the cruel drunken kind, and the smell of whiskey. Then nothing. By the afternoon, the story had changed hands a dozen times. Some said she'd run off with a man and been abandoned. Others said she'd gone to meet a lover and been caught in her sin. The worst said she'd invited it. By sunset, no one asked for the truth. They'd already decided it. The Reverend prayed for strength and told the congregation that his daughter had fallen from grace. He spoke the words with trembling lips, but he did not defend her. His silence sealed her fate. Within days, Red Creek turned its back on her. Mrs. Turnbull, who once shared her biscuits with Clara, crossed the street when she saw her coming. The children Clara had taught in Sunday school whispered behind her back, giggling because their parents did. When she tried to buy bread, the baker said he was out, even though the shelves were full. So Clara moved to the edge of town, to a tiny shack near the river, the very place where her life had been stolen from her. She patched holes in her roof with burlap sacks and learned to survive on what she could gather. She stopped going to church. She stopped speaking to anyone at all. At night, she sat by the river and tried to remember. Sometimes she dreamed of shadows moving in the water, 3, maybe 4 men. One wore a ring that caught the moonlight. She'd wake up gasping, clutching her blanket, her heart screaming for someone to believe her. But no one came. Even her father wouldn't look her in the eye anymore. He'd pass her in town and keep walking, Bible in hand, as if she were a stranger. The ache of that hurt worse than hunger. Still, Clara refused to die. She chopped her own firewood, grew a small patch of beans, and mended old clothes to sell at the general store. She worked with quiet dignity, though the townsfolk muttered "fallen woman" under their breath. She never answered them. One evening, as the sun bled into the desert, Clara stood by the old well outside her shack, filling her bucket. She heard footsteps, soft, sure, unhurried. Turning, she saw a man standing a few yards away, tall, dark hair tied back, his skin bronze from sun and wind. He wore beads around his neck and carried no gun. An Apache. Every instinct told her to be afraid. The people of Red Creek called them savages, killers. But the man's eyes were calm, ancient somehow. He looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with recognition. He spoke low, his English rough but clear. "They lied about you." Clara froze, gripping the bucket's handle. What did you say?" The man's gaze held hers. "I know the truth." Before she could move, before she could ask how, he turned and walked toward the horizon, vanishing into the red dusk. The wind carried his words long after he was gone, and for the first time in months, Clara felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn, her heart still echoing with the words that man had spoken. "They lied about you. I know the truth." It wasn't a dream. She was sure of it. She remembered his eyes, dark as wet stone, steady and solemn, as if they'd seen too much of the world and carried all its grief. She poured water from her bucket into a tin cup and drank slowly, her hands trembling. How could a stranger, an Apache, know anything about that night? The town said no one had been near the river except her. The sheriff had claimed he'd searched the area. Everyone else said it was God's will. But that man's voice had been certain, not like someone guessing or pitying her. It was the voice of someone who had seen. Still, she couldn't dwell on it long. Survival came first. The roof leaked. Her bean patch needed tending and her firewood was running low. She pulled on her worn shawl and started toward the creek to wash clothes. Every step through the dust reminded her that she was alone, and how the town preferred it that way. When she reached the riverbank, she froze. He was there again, the same Apache kneeling beside a wounded horse. Its leg was cut badly, and he was trying to clean the wound with handfuls of muddy water. The animal shivered in pain. Clara's instinct warred with her fear. Part of her wanted to run back to her shack and hide. Another part, a stronger one, refused to turn away from suffering. "Use this," she said quietly, stepping closer. She held out a small flask of clean water. The man looked up, surprised, his gaze searching her face. Then he nodded once, a slow, respectful gesture, and took the flask. She crouched beside him, tearing a strip from her old dress to bind the horse's leg. Her hands worked automatically. She'd tended animals before. Back when her life had been simpler, the Apache watched her in silence, his movements measured and gentle. After a while, she dared to ask, "What's your name?" "Taza," he said simply. His voice carried a weight that made her pause. "Yours?" "Clara." She hesitated. "Clara Dawson." His eyes flickered just slightly, as if the name meant something. Then he said, "I know." A chill ran through her. "You said last night that you knew the truth. What did you mean?" Taza looked toward the river, his jaw tightening. "I was there, near the water that night. I saw what they did." Her breath caught. "You saw?" He nodded. 4 men, drunk. One wore a ring with a silver hawk. "They laughed when they left you. They said no one would believe a preacher's daughter if she spoke." His gaze returned to her. They were right. Clara's legs nearly gave way. All this time she'd wondered if she was going mad, if she'd imagined the voices, the laughter. But now, hearing it spoken aloud, the truth felt heavier than she'd ever imagined. "Why didn't you tell someone?" she whispered. Taza's face darkened. "No one listens to my kind. They would say I lie. They always do." He began to rise, but she reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "Please, don't go. You're the only one who knows. If you leave, they'll win." Taza looked at her hand on his skin, then into her eyes. "If they learn I spoke, they'll come for you again. For both of us. I don't care." Her voice cracked. "I just want the truth to live somewhere other than in my nightmares." He studied her long and hard, then nodded. "I will return. But you must stay hidden." Before she could reply, he whistled softly to the horse, who limped after him. They vanished into the rising heat of morning, leaving Clara alone with a heart that no longer felt numb. She turned toward town in the distance. The church steeple shimmered like a ghost above the roofs. She thought of her father, the sheriff and the mayor's son with his silver ring. For the first time, Clara didn't just feel wronged, she felt angry. The lies that had ruined her name were beginning to crack. Someone out there knew the truth, and now so did she. For days after Taza's visit, Clara couldn't shake his words from her mind. 4 men, one with a silver hawk ring. Those few words became a storm inside her. Every night she sat by the river, staring at her reflection in the dark water, wondering how her own life had become a lie so carefully built by others. The town still whispered when she passed by. Women drew their children close. Men looked away with uneasy guilt. Even the sheriff, who'd once brought her father fresh venison, now pretended she was invisible. Yet as much as their stares stung, they no longer made her bow her head. Something inside her had shifted. One afternoon, she was washing clothes by the creek when she heard the steady rhythm of hooves. Her heart jumped. She turned and saw Taza again, his tall frame silhouetted against the blazing sky. But this time he wasn't alone. His horse stumbled behind him, a long cut bleeding down its flank. Without hesitation, Clara ran toward him. "What happened?" "Men," he said simply, voice tight. "From your town. They think I steal cattle. They shoot at shadows." Clara's chest tightened. "You need to come inside." "I'll help." Taza hesitated. "If they see me near your home, they'll say you brought me." "They already say worse," she answered, her voice steady. He looked at her for a long moment before following. Inside her small shack, Clara boiled water and tore clean strips from an old bedsheet. As she pressed a damp cloth to the horse's wound, Taza stood near the window, silent and watchful. His presence filled the room, solid, grounding, like a mountain that had decided to move beside her. When the animal finally quieted, Clara turned to him. "You said you saw them that night. All of them. Taza nodded slowly. Yes, I was hunting near the river when I heard noise. I hid among the cottonwoods. They were drunk. They called your name, laughed at how the preacher's daughter would beg them to stop. Clara gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Who were they? I do not know their names, Taza said, but I know faces. The one with the ring, he led them. Blonde hair, pale eyes. His hand shook when he lit his cigar. Her breath caught. Blonde hair, pale eyes. That could only be Jacob Turner, the mayor's son. The same man her father once hoped she'd marry. A sickness rose inside her, not of fear, but fury. He ruined me, she whispered. And my father. He preached about sin while protecting him. Taza's voice was low. Your father feared the mayor's power. The town belongs to him. Clara met his gaze. Then we'll take it back. He tilted his head, studying her. You speak like a warrior. I'm just tired of being a ghost, she said. Taza reached into the small pouch at his belt and pulled out a piece of turquoise shaped like a teardrop. He placed it gently in her palm. This is from my sister's necklace, he said softly. She too was taken by men who thought no one would speak for her. I did not arrive in time, but for you I will not be too late. Clara closed her fingers around the stone. Then we'll speak together. The room fell silent except for the wind outside. A moment of understanding passed between them, not born of pity but of shared loss. Two people the world had cast aside, finding in each other a reason to fight. But when Taza turned to leave, his face grew dark. You must be careful. The men who hurt you, they suspect I saw. I've heard their talk. They plan to hunt me at sundown. Her pulse quickened. Then stay. Hide here, he shook his head. If they find me, they'll burn your home. If I die, so be it. But you must live to tell what happened. Before she could protest, he stepped into the doorway. The setting sun caught the edges of his face, turning his eyes to molten gold. They can bury lies, he said, but truth always finds its way out of the ground. When he was gone, Clara sat on the floor, clutching the turquoise. The sound of the wind outside felt different now, no longer hollow but alive. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the darkness. She knew the truth now, and the truth had a name, Taza. The days that followed felt sharper, like every hour was walking on a knife's edge. The townsfolk whispered more than ever. Clara could feel their eyes on her even when her back was turned. Every time she went to fetch water or sell her stitching, someone was watching. The lies had found new breath, and now they carried the name Apache. Word had spread that one of those savages was lurking near the town, stealing cattle and spying on white women. Clara knew where the rumors came from. The same men who'd once stolen her innocence were stirring fear again, this time to hunt down the man who knew too much. That night, as the sun bled into the desert, Clara crept out to the canyons beyond Red Creek. She carried a small bundle of food, bandages, and a wool blanket. Her heart pounded with every step. The sky burned orange and violet, the air thick with the smell of dust and danger. When she reached the narrow ravine where Taza had hidden his wounded horse, she called softly, "It's me." A shadow moved against the rock. Then he appeared, silent as always, his face half lit by the moon. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "They're saying you killed a rancher's calf," she whispered. "They're forming a posse. Jacob Turner's leading it." Taza's jaw tightened. "They want a reason to hunt me. The calf is just a lie." Clara placed the bundle at his feet. "You need to leave. Ride east past the mesas. You'll be safe there." He shook his head. "If I run, the truth dies here. They'll say I was guilty of worse." His gaze softened slightly. "And they'll turn on you again." "They already have," she said bitterly. "They called me a whore when they didn't know the truth. What worse can they do now?" He looked at her, really looked as though weighing her soul, and for a long moment said nothing. The wind howled through the canyon like a spirit between them. Finally he spoke. "When I was a boy, my father said that truth is like the sun. The clouds can hide it for a while, but not forever. They can chase me, but the sun will burn through." Clara blinked back tears. "Then let me help you burn through it." Taza stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold desert air. "You would risk your life for me?" "For you," she said softly, "and for myself." Something flickered in his eyes, a mix of surprise and respect. He nodded once. "Then listen. The man with the silver ring, Jacob Turner, he carries guilt in his scent. Fear, I can use that. But you must be my eyes in town, Clara's throat tightened. They'll know I'm helping you. They already suspect, he said. The question is, will you let their fear silence you again? She straightened her shoulders. No. Taza smiled faintly, and for the first time she saw something beyond the warrior, something gentler, buried deep. Then we will make them speak their own truth. Before dawn, Clara made her way back toward town. The horizon glowed with the first traces of morning. From the hills behind her, she thought she saw Taza watching, a dark shape against the rising sun. She felt safer knowing he was out there, even if danger hunted him. But by the time she reached Red Creek, fear had already taken root. The sheriff was nailing up a new notice at the saloon. Reward, $200 for the capture or death of the Apache known as Taza. Clara's blood turned to ice. Around her, men gathered with rifles and whiskey breath, eager for the hunt. And leading them, clean-shaven and smirking, was Jacob Turner, his silver ring gleaming in the early light. He saw her watching and tipped his hat. Mornin', Miss Dawson. Best stay inside today. We're cleaning up the filth that's been hanging around your part of town. Clara met his eyes and felt the old fear try to rise, but it couldn't. Not anymore. Because now she knew what he'd done, and she knew Taza wasn't the only one being hunted. That night, Clara packed what she could and waited until darkness swallowed Red Creek whole. Then she slipped away toward the canyons, toward the only person who'd ever believed her. The hunter had become the hunted. But this time, she refused to hide. The moon hung high and round as a silver coin when Clara reached the edge of the desert. Her breath came hard and fast. Her boots were torn, her palms scraped raw from climbing over rock and thorn, but she didn't stop until she reached the familiar narrow canyon. Taza, she called softly. For a long time, there was only the echo of her own voice. Then from the shadows, a low whistle sounded, the same call he used for his horse. Relief flooded her chest. Moments later, he stepped out from between the rocks, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, his face half lit by moonlight. You shouldn't be here, he said, though his tone was softer this time. They put a price on your head, she said breathlessly. $200 for you, dead or alive. Taza's eyes darkened. They'll find a way to call it justice. Clara dropped her satchel to the ground. They've already taken everything from me. I won't let them take you too. He looked at her for a long moment, then motioned for her to follow him deeper into the canyon. There, a small fire flickered between the rocks. Beside it lay a worn blanket, his horse sleeping nearby with its bandaged leg. Clara knelt near the flame, stretching her hands toward the warmth. I can't stay in town, she said quietly. They're watching me again. The sheriff thinks I've been hiding you. Jacob Turner said I enticed devils. Taza's jaw clenched, but his voice remained calm. They fear what they can't own. You're not theirs to ruin anymore. She looked up at him. And what am I to you, Taza? For a moment he didn't answer. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a faint scar along his cheekbone. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. You are proof that truth can live even when they try to kill it. He reached into the small pouch at his side and took out something wrapped in deerskin. When he unwrapped it, Clara saw a turquoise stone, deep blue with a streak of gold running through the center. He held it in his palm for a moment, then offered it to her. This belonged to my sister, he said quietly. Her name was Nalan. Soldiers came to our camp one night, took her because they wanted her silence. She died because no one spoke for her. I buried her beside the river, not far from where I found you. When I saw you lying there that night, I thought... He paused, swallowing hard. I thought the spirits had sent me a second chance to speak the truth I could not speak for her. Clara's throat tightened. She reached out, her fingers brushing the stone. Then let's make a promise, she whispered. No more silence. Not for her. Not for me. Taza studied her for a moment, then nodded. We speak together, and if the truth burns, then let it burn everything that hides it. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly between them. Above, the desert sky stretched wide and endless, stars like scattered ashes. Clara could almost forget the fear waiting beyond the canyon. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Then a coyote howled in the distance, a long, mournful cry that rolled across the rocks. Taza stood instantly, his body tense. They're close, he said. Riders, Clara's pulse quickened. The posse? He nodded once. They hunt under the moon, like wolves. She stood gripping the turquoise in her hand. Then we hide together. No, he said firmly. They cannot find you here. Go to the old mission by the dry creek. There's shelter there. I will draw them away. Clara shook her head. No, you'll be killed. But Taza's hand came to her shoulder, gentle yet strong. If I fall, promise me you will not stop. The truth must live. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. I promise. He gave her a faint smile, one that held both sorrow and something deeper, something unspoken. Then we are bound, Clara Dawson. By truth, by fire, by the desert. And before she could say another word, he melted into the night, silent, swift, and gone. Clara stood alone beneath the stars. The turquoise clutched against her heart, her breath trembling as hoofbeats echoed faintly in the distance. The pact was made. The desert had witnessed it. And nothing, no lie, no fear, no man would ever silence her again. The next morning, the desert was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Clara waited in the canyon until the first hint of sunlight touched the rocks, but Taza never returned. Only the echo of distant gunfire told her he was still being hunted. Her promise to him burned like a brand on her soul. The truth must live. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She went back to Red Creek. The townsfolk stared as she walked down Main Street, her face streaked with dust, her shawl torn from the desert wind. Some crossed themselves, others muttered. Clara ignored them all. Every step toward the white-steepled church felt heavier than the last. Inside, her father stood at the pulpit, arranging his sermon notes. His once proud shoulders seemed smaller now, his voice weaker when he saw her. Clara, what are you doing here, child? She looked him straight in the eye. You called me fallen. You prayed for forgiveness while I was the one who needed defending. Clara, no. Her voice rang through the church, startling even herself. You told them to turn their backs on me because you were afraid of losing their favor. You let them destroy my name to protect the mayor's son. The Reverend's hands trembled. He glanced toward the door as if afraid someone might hear. If you speak that aloud, they'll hang you, or worse. You don't understand the power those men hold. Clara took a slow step forward, and I don't care anymore. Her father's eyes filled with tears. You think the truth will save you? It won't, Clara, it'll kill you. Maybe, she said quietly, but at least I'll die with my name back. She turned and walked out before he could answer, leaving the Reverend alone at his altar, his Bible shaking in his hands. That night, as Clara lit her oil lamp, a faint crackling sound reached her ears. She looked up, and her blood froze. Outside, orange light flickered through the window. The smell of smoke filled the air. Her cabin was on fire. She ran to the door, but the heat forced her back. The flames licked up the walls, devouring the dry wood. Through the blaze, she saw figures on horseback, 3 of them. Their faces hidden by scarves, their laughter low and cruel. One lifted a torch high and shouted, "No place for liars in Red Creek!" Clara stumbled back, coughing, covering her mouth with her shawl. She tried the back window, but the smoke was thick, choking her lungs. She dropped to her knees, gasping. Then through the roar of fire came a voice, a deep, commanding shout. A silhouette burst through the flames. Strong arms grabbed her, lifted her, and carried her out into the cold night air. When she opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground a few yards away, the stars spinning above her. Taza knelt beside her, his face streaked with soot, his sleeve soaked in blood. You're hurt, she croaked. He shook his head. Only a scratch. You breathe. She coughed hard, tears spilling down her soot-covered cheeks. They burned everything. Yes, he said quietly, watching the flames consume what little she had left. That's what men do when truth frightens them. They burn what they can't silence. She turned her head toward him. You came back. Taza met her gaze. I told you, the desert keeps its promises. The fire raged behind them, but for the first time, Clara didn't feel helpless. She'd seen their faces. She knew who had done it, and now she had nothing left to lose. They'll come again, Taza warned. Then let them, she said, her voice steady as stone, because next time I'll be ready. He nodded slowly, a small spark of pride glinting in his dark eyes. Then it begins. As dawn broke, the 2 of them stood on the ridge overlooking what was left of her cabin. Smoke curled into the pale morning sky, rising like a ghost of everything she'd lost. But beneath the ashes, Clara felt something stirring, something stronger than fear, deeper than pain. It was the sound of her own courage, finally waking, and for the first time since that terrible night by the river, she didn't feel alone. The town of Red Creek woke to rumors that morning, rumors of fire vengeance and the girl who refused to die. By sunrise, word had spread that Clara Hayes had survived the blaze meant to erase her from memory. She and Taza watched the smoke fade from the ridge above the canyon. The wind was sharp, the sky raw and red like a fresh wound. Clara's hands trembled as she packed the last of her things into a worn satchel. There wasn't much left. An old photograph of her mother, a Bible charred at the edges, and a small silver cross that had once hung over her bed. Taza watched her silently. He could see the fire still burning behind her eyes, fiercer than the one that had taken her home. "You don't have to go back," he said. "They'll come again. Men like that, they can't let a woman stand against them." Clara cinched her shawl tighter. "That's exactly why I have to go back." Taza stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "They ruined your name. They burned your home. What else must they take before you let go?" She turned toward him, her jaw set. "My silence. That's what they want now, and I won't give it." For a long moment, the Apache said nothing. Then he nodded, a slow, solemn bow of understanding. "Then I'll go with you," she shook her head. "If they see you, they'll shoot you on sight." Taza's lips curved into the faintest smile. "They've been trying for years. Let them try again." They rode into Red Creek under the noon sun side by side. The town fell still at the sight of them. Clara Hayes, the fallen preacher's daughter, and the Apache who had once been branded a killer. The sheriff stepped out of his office, hand resting on his holster. "You got no right bringing him here, Miss Hayes." "I have every right," she shot back. "You're the one who should have done your job instead of helping cover what was done to me." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You watch your mouth, girl. Folks here already think you've lost your mind." "Maybe I have," she said, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "But I remember every lie you told to protect the mayor's son. I remember every whisper, every look, every hand that turned me away while I begged for the truth to matter." The street filled with murmurs. The blacksmith paused mid-swing. The schoolteacher stepped out of the general store. Even Reverend Hayes appeared at the church door, pale and trembling. The mayor himself emerged from his carriage, his fine coat buttoned tight, his expression a mask of righteousness. "Enough, Miss Hayes," he said coldly. "You're upsetting the good people of this town." Clara took a step forward, eyes burning. "You call yourself good? You stood by while you all destroyed me to save your name." The mayor's jaw clenched. "Careful, girl. That Apache might protect you for now, but when he's gone, you'll have no one left." At that, Taza moved. In one smooth motion, he stepped between Clara and the mayor, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. His voice carried through the tense silence. "She speaks truth," he said, his accent sharp but clear. "You can bury a body. You can burn a house. But you cannot kill what is true. I saw what you did. I know who your men are." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mayor's face turned ashen. "You lie." Taza's dark eyes hardened. "If I lie, why does your son run?" Everyone turned. The mayor's son, Elliot, was backing away slowly, his face pale as bone. His hand twitched toward his gun. Before he could draw, Taza was there, faster than anyone had seen. He caught the boy's wrist, twisted it, and the gun clattered to the ground. "Enough running," the Apache said. "Tell them what you did." Elliot's lips trembled. Sweat ran down his temples. I didn't mean to." "Say it," Clara demanded, her voice breaking. "Say my name." He dropped to his knees. "Clara Hayes, I was the one, it was me. She begged me to stop and I didn't. And my father made everyone believe she wanted it." The crowd erupted. Women gasped. Men cursed. The sheriff looked away. The mayor staggered backward, his power crumbling in an instant. "Elliot, you fool." But it was too late. The truth, ugly and undeniable, was out. Clara stood frozen, her breath shallow, the moment she'd waited for finally real. Taza looked at her gently. "Now they know," tears welled in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Now they know." And for the first time in years she felt clean. Not forgiven, not whole, but free. The confession spread through Red Creek like wildfire, faster than gossip, fiercer than judgment. By sunset, every saloon, stable, and church pew buzzed with whispers of Clara Hayes and the truth that had cracked the town open. But truth, Clara quickly learned, did not bring peace. It brought rage. The mayor's son, Elliot, was dragged to the jailhouse by the sheriff, though not roughly enough to satisfy those who'd long hated the powerful men of Red Creek. Women spat as he passed, while others turned away, ashamed of their own silence all those years. The mayor, however, wasn't ready to surrender. That evening, as the desert sun bled into the horizon, Clara sat in Taza's small camp outside town. The fire crackled between them, the air thick with the scent of pine and smoke. Taza was sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate motions, his expression unreadable. "They'll come for you," he said quietly, never looking up. "For both of us." Clara nodded, staring into the flames. "I'm counting on it." He raised his gaze then, eyes glinting like obsidian. "You speak like a warrior." "I've had to become one," she said. "You taught me that." Taza studied her for a long moment, then set the blade aside. "The truth is a sharp thing, Clara. It cuts both ways." She looked at him unsure. "What do you mean?" "You think they hate only me," he said. "But you've taken their pride, their power, their comfort. The kind of men who built Red Creek. They don't let shame live long." Before she could respond, the crack of gunfire split the night. Taza was on his feet instantly, pulling her behind a rock. Bullets tore through the brush, scattering sparks from the fire. Shadows moved among the trees, 5, maybe 6 men, their silhouettes outlined by torchlight. "Get down," he hissed, loading his rifle with calm precision. "They came for me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Taza said, his jaw set. "They came for us." The next few minutes blurred into chaos, gunfire echoing off stone, shouts carried by the wind. Taza moved like a phantom, silent and deadly. He fired, ducked, rolled, reloaded. One man fell with a cry. Another fled into the darkness. Clara clutched a pistol in shaking hands. She'd never fired one before. Taza's voice cut through the storm. "Now, Clara." "To the left, behind the cedar." She turned, saw a man raising his rifle, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her shoulder, the sound deafening. The man dropped. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had just taken a life. Taza was at her side in seconds, his hand gripping her arm. "You did what you had to. Do not look back." When the smoke cleared, 3 bodies lay still among the rocks. The rest had fled. Clara sank to her knees, trembling. "They'll come again. The mayor won't stop until I'm gone." Taza crouched beside her, his voice low but steady. "Then we end it. No more running." She looked at him, her fear slowly hardening into resolve. "How?" He met her gaze. "We take the fight to him." The next day, the town awoke to a sight it would never forget. The mayor's grand house, with its white columns and red curtains, stood surrounded by a silent crowd. At its steps stood Clara Hayes, and beside her Taza, the Apache warrior whose very presence defied everything Red Creek had ever believed. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. "You burned my home. You tried to bury my name, but you forgot that truth doesn't burn. And it doesn't die." The mayor appeared on the porch, flanked by his men. "You've brought shame on this town," he spat. "On yourself." "No," she said. "You did that." Taza stepped forward, his rifle slung across his back. "You have one chance, old man. Let justice live, or I will let it die with you." The sheriff hesitated, his hand hovering near his gun, torn between law and conscience. Then something shifted in the crowd. One by one, the townsfolk stepped forward. Farmers, blacksmiths, mothers clutching children. "No more lies," someone shouted. "She's telling the truth," cried another. The mayor's face twisted in fury, but he saw it now, the end of his power. His legacy turning to dust before his eyes. "You'll regret this," he hissed, retreating into his mansion. But his threats meant nothing anymore, because Clara Hayes wasn't the broken girl by the river anymore. She was the voice that Red Creek had silenced, and the woman who had found her truth in fire. Taza glanced at her as the crowd closed in, a proud, quiet smile on his face. "You see, Clara," he murmured, "truth doesn't need warriors. It makes them." And as the first light of dawn touched the desert, the people of Red Creek saw their first taste of reckoning. The dawn after the standoff painted Red Creek in a pale gold light, soft yet heavy with change. The town was no longer whispering. It was watching. Watching Clara Hayes, the woman they once spat on, now walk through their streets with her head held high. Watching the Apache beside her, his stride silent but commanding. Elliot, the mayor's son, still sat in the small jailhouse on the edge of town. For the first time in years, the sheriff had refused to take orders. He'd locked the cell himself and stood guard all night. Perhaps guilt had finally found its way through the cracks in his heart. That morning, the townsfolk gathered outside the church, ironically the same place where Clara's reputation had been shattered. Now, it was to hold a trial, not by law, but by conscience. Inside, the pews filled fast. The mayor sat near the front, his fine suit wrinkled, his face drawn tight with anger. His son, pale and trembling, was brought before the crowd. And Clara stood near the altar, where her father, the Reverend Hayes, had once preached about sin and forgiveness. Her father was there too, sitting silently in the first pew, his Bible clutched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He hadn't spoken since the truth had come out. Sheriff Dugan cleared his throat. "We're here because this town's lived too long under lies. Miss Hayes has asked to speak before we make judgment." Clara stepped forward. For a moment she just looked around the church, the same stained glass, the same walls that had heard her cries of innocence years ago. "When I stood here last," she began softly, "you called me shame. You said I'd brought sin into this house, and I believed you." The silence was thick, the kind that even the air dared not break. "I left this town with nothing but my name in tatters," she continued. "But the truth followed me, because the truth always follows. It found me in the desert, half dead and ready to give up, and an Apache, the man you all fear, was the only one who helped me stand again." Taza, standing at the back, met her gaze and gave a slow nod. Clara turned toward the mayor. "You burned my house to keep your secret. You sent men to kill me to protect your son. But you failed. Not because I'm stronger than you, but because the truth is." The mayor stood, his voice shaking with fury. "You think this will change anything? You think these people will follow? A fallen girl and a savage?" Before anyone could respond, the Reverend rose. His voice cracked, old but firm. "That fallen girl is my daughter, and the only savage I see is a man who would trade his soul for his pride." The crowd stirred. The mayor froze, disbelief written across his face. Reverend Hayes turned to Clara, tears in his eyes. "I wronged you, child. I feared men more than I feared God. And for that, I will answer every prayer I ever spoke against you." Clara's throat tightened. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words. Now that they came, they broke something. Open inside her. A pain and relief tangled so deeply she couldn't separate them. The sheriff motioned to Elliot. "You've confessed, boy. You got anything left to say before we pass judgment?" Elliot's voice was barely a whisper. "I wish I could undo it. I wish I'd listened when she said no." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sheriff Dugan nodded slowly. "Then you'll face what comes, with the same law that failed her once." No one argued, not even the mayor. When it was over, the town spilled out into the sunlight. Some touched Clara's arm in quiet apology. Others hung their heads in shame, but she didn't need their words. Their eyes told her enough. She walked to the edge of town where Taza waited by his horse. "It's done," he said softly. "Yes," she whispered. "But it doesn't feel like victory." He looked toward the horizon, his dark hair catching the wind. "Truth isn't meant to feel like victory. It feels like freedom, and that is rarer." She smiled faintly. "Will you stay?" He shook his head. "My people need me. There's land to guard, spirits to honor. I am not made for walls." Her heart clenched, though she'd known this moment would come. "Then I'll pray the desert carries your name kindly, and I'll pray it keeps you safe," he said, touching 2 fingers to his forehead in the Apache way. The wind stirred dust around their boots. Neither spoke again. When Taza finally mounted his horse and rode toward the canyon, Clara stood watching until he was only a speck against the endless gold horizon. She'd thought she'd lost everything, but what she'd really lost was her fear, and in its place, finally, was peace. Months passed. The desert softened again under spring rains, and the town of Red Creek began to change, quietly, almost reluctantly. The wind still carried gossip, But now Clara Hayes's name was spoken with something closer to reverence than scorn. The old saloon keeper who once refused her a drink now poured one in her honor every Sunday. The school teacher told her students, "How Miss Hayes taught us that truth is worth bleeding for." Even the sheriff, grizzled and gray, placed his badge on her porch one morning as a silent apology. But Clara never let herself forget the cost of it all, the ashes of her home, the fear in her father's eyes, and the night she had stood beside an Apache warrior who refused to let her die in shame. Every morning she walked to the ridge overlooking the canyon, the same place where she and Taza had once watched the smoke rise from her burned cabin. She would stand there with the wind in her hair and whisper a prayer, not of sorrow, but of thanks. Her father had moved out of town, unable to preach anymore after the truth broke him. He lived quietly by the river now, growing old in solitude. Clara visited him often, bringing bread and news of how the town was trying, slowly, to be better than it had been. But at night, when the moon was full, Clara sometimes dreamed of Taza. She would see him riding through the desert, free, fierce, untamed, and hear his voice echo in her mind. Truth doesn't need warriors. It makes them. And she'd wake, with tears in her eyes, not of sorrow but of something deeper, gratitude. One morning, a rider came into Red Creek. He was tall, with hair black as night and skin bronzed by the desert sun. He wore a necklace of carved bone and carried a single eagle feather bound in red thread. He stopped at the general store, bought flour and bullets, and then asked, "Where's the woman they call Clara Hayes?" Children followed him through the street, whispering, "He's one of them, an Apache." Clara was fixing the church fence when he found her. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat, not because she thought it was Taza, but because the man carried himself the same way, with purpose, with silence, with dignity. He bowed his head respectfully. "My mother said I would find you here. She told me to tell you. Taza rides with the spirits now." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. Clara's breath caught, her hand tightening around the wood. "When?" she whispered. "Last winter," the young man said softly. "He died protecting our valley from the bluecoats, but before he left he made me promise to find the woman who spoke the truth in a town of lies." Clara turned away, tears slipping down her face. The wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush, the smell of the land that had shaped them both. "He told me to give you this," the young Apache added, holding out a small pouch of tanned hide. Inside was a single turquoise stone, smooth and warm to the touch. Clara pressed it to her heart. "He kept his promise," she murmured. The young man nodded. "He said you would understand." "I do," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "Tell your people the truth he fought for lives on." He bowed once more and rode off toward the horizon, his silhouette fading into the gold light. Years later, when strangers passed through Red Creek, they always heard the same story, about a preacher's daughter who'd been cast out and shamed, about the Apache who found her half dead and taught her to rise again, about how together they brought truth to a town built on lies. Some said she lived to old age and died with a smile on her lips, still wearing that turquoise stone around her neck. Others swore they saw her, even years later, riding along the canyon at dusk, a woman in a pale shawl, her hair catching the wind, with a tall Apache figure beside her. No one knew which was true, but one thing was certain. The name Clara Hayes no longer meant shame. It meant courage. And as long as the desert wind whispered through Red Creek, it carried with it her story. The woman who dared to tell the truth, and the Apache who believed her when no one else would.